Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. Imagine living peacefully on land your family has owned for generations, only to have a power-hungry HOA president march in, claiming part of it as her own. This is the story of James Wilson, a farmer who faced arson, betrayal, and a courtroom showdown to protect his legacy. Justice, however, would have the final word. James Wilson, a 62-year-old farmer, stood at the edge of his sprawling 30-acre property in Caldwell County, Texas, watching the sun cast a golden glow over the fields. This land had been his sanctuary for as long as he could remember, a legacy passed down through 3 generations of Wilsons. The fertile pastures, 2 sturdy barns, and the modest farmhouse were more than just property. They were a part of his soul. James had spent decades tending to the land, raising crops, and maintaining the tools and tractors that were the backbone of his livelihood. Around him, however, the world was changing. Over the past 10 years, high-end residential developments had begun to encroach upon his once secluded farm. The latest of these Woodridge estates lay just beyond his western fence line, gleaming with uniform rows of luxury homes and manicured lawns. The neighborhood boasted the sort of suburban perfection that made James wince. Along with it came the inevitable presence of homeowners associations, HOAs, entities he avoided like a bad harvest. Developers and real estate agents had frequently approached James, offering lucrative deals to buy out his property. Each time, James had firmly refused. His land was not for sale, no matter the price. To him, the farm was more than just acres of dirt and timber. It was a testament to his family's perseverance. The same steadfastness applied when HOA representatives had come calling. They'd offered him memberships and benefits, suggesting he could integrate his land into their polished suburban network. James had always politely declined. Despite this, James remained a good neighbor. He'd exchanged polite nods and casual conversations with the residents of Woodridge Estates. However, the arrival of a new HOA president, Karen Thompson, changed everything. Karen was a sharp, ambitious woman in her late 40s, infamous for her domineering attitude. Almost immediately after taking office, she began spearheading efforts to enhance the community. Karen's efforts weren't limited to the HOA's jurisdiction. Her ambitious vision stretched to areas she believed could be reclaimed for the greater good. James first heard about Karen through passing gossip at the local feed store. Neighbors chuckled nervously about her strict enforcement of HOA rules, her penchant for sending violation notices over the smallest infractions, and her habit of using charm or intimidation to get her way. At first, James dismissed the stories. His land, clearly marked and legally outside of the HOA's reach, should have been safe from her interference, or so he thought. On a crisp autumn morning, James was repairing the fence near the Woodridge boundary when he noticed Karen approaching. Her bright red blazer and designer shoes seemed comically out of place on the dusty trail. With a clipboard clutched to her chest and a determined expression, she marched toward him, waving to get his attention. "Mr. Wilson," she called, her voice chipper but edged with authority. James wiped his hands on his jeans and nodded. "That's me. Can I help you?" Karen offered a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm Karen Thompson, the president of the Woodridge Estates Homeowners Association. I'm here to discuss an exciting proposal that will benefit everyone in the community, including you." James raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" Karen launched into a polished pitch about a proposed public park. She described lush playgrounds, bike trails, and picnic spots, all conveniently located where James's 2 barns currently stood. She gestured grandly toward his land, as if it were already part of her vision. "This area is ideal," she explained, "and as it happens, it's been included in the HOA's latest planning map. We've already obtained the necessary approvals to move forward." James frowned. "You've got the wrong place, ma'am. This is my property. My barns have been here longer than Woodridge Estates has existed." Karen's smile tightened. She produced a set of documents from her clipboard and handed them to him. "These maps and permits confirm that this portion of the land is under HOA jurisdiction. You'll have 2 weeks to remove any personal belongings and vacate the area. After that, construction will begin." James's chest tightened as he flipped through the papers. Something about them felt off, but he couldn't pinpoint what. "This land's been in my family for 3 generations. I've got the deeds to prove it." Karen gave a saccharine smile. "If you can produce documentation, I'd be happy to review it. but I'd suggest cooperating. It'll save everyone time and trouble." Without waiting for his response, Karen turned on her heel and strode back toward her car, leaving James standing in the dust with a mixture of confusion and anger. As the sound of her tires faded, James made up his mind. He'd fight to protect what was his. For now, the land remained quiet, but James could feel the storm brewing on the horizon. The 2 weeks Karen had given James passed like a slow-burning wick. Each day, he found himself pacing his property, replaying their conversation in his head. The documents she had handed him sat on his kitchen table, glaring at him like an accusation. He had read them over and over, searching for anything legitimate, but his gut told him they were forged. Determined not to leave anything to chance, he had driven into town to meet with his lawyer, Stephen Baxter, a man known for his meticulous work and no-nonsense approach. Stephen had examined the papers carefully. "These aren't worth the ink they're printed with," he said, pointing to discrepancies in the maps and signatures. "Your land is clearly outside their jurisdiction, and unless you've signed something, and I know you haven't, they have no claim to it." Relief washed over James, but Stephen wasn't finished. "That said, I'd recommend covering your bases. Double-check your boundary surveys with the county, and get fresh copies of your property records. Also, set up some cameras near those barns. You've already seen how aggressive this woman is. Better to be prepared." James followed Stephen's advice to the letter. He spent the next few days setting up motion sensor cameras around his property and filing requests at the county clerk's office for updated property records. By the end of the week, he had solid proof that his land was his alone. Yet something about Karen's confidence unsettled him. People like her didn't back down easily. On the 14th day, James woke early to the sound of heavy machinery. The low rumble of engines and the metallic clank of equipment echoed through the crisp morning air. He hurried to his barns and froze at the sight before him. 3 large trucks and a bulldozer were parked near the edge of his property, surrounded by a crew of workers in bright orange vests. Among them stood Karen, clipboard in hand, issuing instructions with the air of someone who owned the world. "What the hell is going on here?" James shouted, striding toward the group. Karen turned, her smile as polished as ever. "Good morning, Mr. Wilson. I hope you've taken this time to relocate your belongings. We're ready to begin clearing the area for the park." James's jaw tightened. "This is my property, and you have no right to be here." Karen's expression didn't waver. Instead, she calmly held up the same papers she had shown him 2 weeks earlier. "These documents grant the HOA authorization. I gave you ample time to comply, Mr. Wilson." James pulled out his own set of documents, the fresh property records he had just obtained. "These are official records from the county. They prove this land belongs to me and has nothing to do with your HOA. Karen's smile faltered briefly, but she quickly regained her composure. "I'm afraid your records are outdated. This area was recently reassigned. Perhaps you should take it up with the city planning office if you have concerns." James could feel his blood boiling. "That's exactly what I'll do. But right now, you and your crew need to get off my property before I call the sheriff." Karen sighed, gesturing to the workers to hold off. "Mr. Wilson, I'm trying to be reasonable. Do you really want to escalate this? You'll be delaying a project that benefits the entire community." "Get office my land," James repeated, his voice steady but firm. Karen's eyes narrowed, but she finally nodded. "Fine. We'll pause for now, but don't think this is over." She motioned for the workers to pack up, her heels clicking angrily as she stomped back to her SUV. James watched the trucks rumble away, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. He didn't need to be a mind reader to know that Karen wasn't retreating. She was regrouping. Whatever her next move was, James would be ready. For now, the barns and his land were safe, but the unease lingered like a storm cloud on the horizon. The tranquility of James's farm didn't last long. Barely a week had passed since Karen and her crew retreated when James noticed signs that the conflict was far from over. He spotted unfamiliar cars driving slowly along the edge of his property, lingering near the barns. On more than one occasion, he saw figures standing at the boundary line, gesturing toward his land as if discussing plans. Karen wasn't backing down. She was scheming. Late one evening, James returned home from a supply run to find a letter taped to his front door. It bore the official letterhead of the Woodridge Estates HOA and was signed, predictably, by Karen Thompson. The letter claimed that James was now officially in violation of community development regulations and demanded immediate compliance. It also outlined a final warning that legal action would be taken if he didn't remove the barns. Infuriated, James stormed inside and called his lawyer. Stephen was unsurprised. "This is just posturing," he assured James. "She's trying to intimidate you into giving up. Ignore the letter, but keep documenting everything. The more evidence we have, the stronger your case will be if this goes to court." Stephen's advice proved timely as Karen's harassment escalated. James awoke one morning to find several wooden stakes driven into the ground along the edge of his property, marked with bright orange flags. A crude sign erected nearby declared the area as future site of Woodridge Community Park. Furious, James grabbed his phone and called the sheriff's office. When Deputy Mason arrived, James explained the situation, showing him the stakes and the documents proving his ownership. Mason shook his head. "This is clearly your property. I'll make sure these get removed, and I'll have a word with Karen about trespassing." Karen, of course, denied everything. When the deputy visited her, she claimed ignorance and insisted the markers were part of a preliminary survey for the park. "If Mr. Wilson wants to challenge the legality, he's welcome to contact my office," she told the deputy smugly. A few days later, the tension reached its breaking point. James was working in his tool barn when the sound of engines once again broke the quiet. He rushed outside to find Karen's crew back on his land, this time with excavators and cement mixers. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" James bellowed, striding toward the group. Karen emerged from the group, clipboard in hand, her usual smile plastered across her face. "Mr. Wilson," she said smoothly, "we've tried to be patient, but you've left us no choice. Construction begins today." James pointed toward the property line. "This is trespassing. I've warned you, and I'm done playing games. You leave now, or I'm calling the sheriff again." Karen raised her chin defiantly, waving her documents at him. "These papers give us the right to proceed. Call whoever you like, but it won't stop progress." Without hesitation, James pulled out his phone and dialed 911. The sight of him speaking to the dispatcher caused Karen's confidence to waver. By the time the sheriff arrived, Karen was frantically instructing her crew to pack up. Sheriff Bowman reviewed the situation and sided with James. "This property is clearly yours, Mr. Wilson," he said, turning to Karen. "If you or your crew step foot here again without permission, you'll face legal consequences." Karen didn't argue. Instead, she left with her crew, her face pale and her jaw tight. James watched them go, his resolve stronger than ever. He knew this wasn't over, but he'd fight tooth and nail to protect what was his. James had barely begun to feel a sense of relief after the sheriff's intervention when the unthinkable happened. The evening started peacefully enough. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the farm as James finished his supper and settled into his favorite chair with a book. Outside, the quiet hum of cicadas was interrupted only by the occasional bark of his dog, Max, patrolling the property. Close to midnight, James awoke to Max's frantic barking, followed by the distant crackle of flames. At first, he thought he was dreaming, but the faint smell of smoke jolted him fully awake. Heart pounding, he grabbed his flashlight and rushed outside. The sight before him was nightmarish. The tool barn, where he kept decades' worth of equipment, was engulfed in flames. The fire had spread to the larger barn housing his tractors and machinery. Thick black smoke billowed into the sky as the orange glow illuminated the night. James could barely hear his own thoughts over Max's barking and the roar of the inferno. "Dear God," James muttered as he fumbled for his phone and dialed 911. Within minutes, the Caldwell County Fire Department arrived, their sirens piercing the darkness. Firefighters worked tirelessly to contain the blaze, but it was clear the barns were a total loss. James stood helplessly, watching as years of hard work and investment were reduced to ash. The air was thick with the acrid stench of burned wood and scorched metal. As the firefighters doused the last of the flames, one of them approached James. "It looks deliberate," the firefighter said grimly. "There are signs of accelerants. Do you have security cameras?" The words hit James like a bolt of lightning. The cameras! He had installed them just weeks ago. Without waiting for daylight, James rushed back into the house, loaded the footage onto his laptop, and began scanning through the recordings. His stomach churned as he watched the scene unfold. At 11:42 p.m., a car pulled up near the barns. Even in the grainy footage, James recognized the sleek shape of Karen Thompson's vehicle. 3 masked figures stepped out, carrying containers of what appeared to be gasoline. The video captured them dousing the area near the barns and tossing lit matches into the straw bales. The fire spread rapidly, and within minutes they were gone. James stared at the screen, his hands trembling. There was no doubt now. This was no accident. It was an act of pure malice. And Karen, whether directly or indirectly, was behind it. At sunrise, James met with the sheriff and handed over the footage. Sheriff Bowman's face darkened as he watched the video. "This is serious," he said. "We'll issue a warrant and bring her in for questioning. We're treating this as arson." The devastation of the fire sank in fully as James surveyed the ruins later that morning. Charred beams jutted out like skeletal remains. The tools and machinery he had spent a lifetime collecting were twisted, blackened heaps. Even a portion of his crops near the barns had been scorched. The financial loss was staggering, but what cut deeper was the violation, the feeling that someone had willfully destroyed a part of his life. Despite the devastation, James's resolve hardened. Karen had taken this fight too far, and he would ensure she paid for what she had done. By the end of the day, James's lawyer, Stephen Baxter, had filed an official lawsuit against Karen and the HOA for arson, property damage, and malicious intent. James knew the road ahead would be long, but the evidence was on his side. The fire might have destroyed his barns, but it had also ignited a fire in him, a determination to seek justice and protect the legacy his family had built. The morning after the fire, James sat in his lawyer's office, the smell of smoke still clinging to his jacket. Stephen Baxter leaned over his desk, carefully reviewing the security footage. As the video played, his expression grew darker. "This is damning," Stephen said, pausing the footage at the moment Karen's car appeared. "There's no question about her involvement. This gives us leverage not only in the civil case, but also for criminal charges. Arson is a serious offense." Stephen immediately filed a lawsuit against Karen and the HOA, citing arson, trespassing, and property destruction. At the same time, the sheriff's department officially launched a criminal investigation. They issued subpoenas for Karen's phone records and financial transactions, searching for any links to the masked accomplices seen on the footage. Meanwhile, James worked tirelessly to compile evidence. He retrieved decades of deeds, property records, and maintenance receipts to establish the value of the barns and equipment lost in the fire. His neighbors, many of whom had remained silent during earlier confrontations, began to come forward. Some expressed outrage at Karen's actions, while others shared their own grievances about her authoritarian behavior within the HOA. "She's been overstepping for years," said one neighbor, a middle-aged man named Tom. "Fines for ridiculous things, threats to sue if anyone pushed back. She's got a long history of bullying people." This flood of support bolstered James's confidence. His lawyer began collecting testimonies from these neighbors, building a broader narrative of Karen's abuse of power. It wasn't just about the fire anymore. It was about holding her accountable for a pattern of reckless behavior. As court dates were set, Karen attempted to deflect. She denied all involvement, claiming the security footage was misleading and insisting she had been home the night of the fire. But her bravado was beginning to crack under the weight of mounting evidence. Despite the emotional toll, James found solace in the solidarity of his community. For the first time in years, people seemed united, not just in opposing Karen, but in supporting his fight for justice. Though the road ahead promised to be grueling, James was ready. With evidence in hand and a community behind him, he prepared to take the fight to court. The courthouse buzzed with quiet anticipation as James Wilson stepped inside, his boots clicking softly against the polished floor. The trial against Karen Thompson and the Woodridge Estates HOA had drawn considerable attention, not just from neighbors, but also from local media. Reporters gathered near the steps, whispering about the footage of arson and Karen's history of overreach as HOA president. In the courtroom, Karen sat at the defendant's table, flanked by her legal team. Gone was her usual confidence. Her lips were pursed, and her eyes darted nervously. Her attorneys had attempted to suppress the damning security footage, but the judge had denied their motion, stating it was crucial to the case. James took his seat beside his lawyer, Stephen Baxter, whose meticulous preparation was about to pay off. As the trial began, the prosecution wasted no time presenting the evidence. The security footage played on a large screen, showing Karen's car pulling up near the barns and the masked individuals setting the fire. The courtroom fell silent except for the crackle of flames in the video. "Ladies and gentlemen," the prosecutor began, "this is not just a case of property damage. This is a deliberate act of arson carried out with malicious intent, orchestrated by someone who believed herself above the law." Karen's lawyers argued that she had no connection to the masked accomplices and that her car's presence near the scene was a coincidence. But the prosecution countered with phone records showing calls between Karen and one of the suspects mere hours before the fire. Financial statements revealed suspicious withdrawals that coincided with payments made to one of the accomplices. Next came the testimonies. James took the stand, recounting his interactions with Karen in vivid detail, the forged documents, the threats, and her blatant disregard for his ownership. "This wasn't just an attack on my property," James said, his voice steady but laced with emotion. "It was an attack on my family's legacy, on everything I've worked for my entire life." Several neighbors also testified, describing Karen's history of bullying and her relentless enforcement of HOA rules. One neighbor, Tom, shared how Karen had fined him for non-compliant landscaping, simply because he planted wildflowers instead of grass. "She used the HOA like a weapon," Tom said, his voice tinged with bitterness. Karen's defense tried to paint James as a stubborn landowner, unwilling to cooperate with progress, but their arguments fell flat against the mountain of evidence. By the time closing arguments were delivered, it was clear which way the case was leaning. The jury deliberated for less than a day. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous: guilty. Karen was convicted of arson, conspiracy, and fraud, and sentenced to 8 years in prison. Two of her accomplices received 5-year sentences each. The HOA, though not directly involved in the fire, was found liable for failing to supervise its president's actions and ordered to pay James $1 million in damages. As the judge delivered the final sentence, James felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Justice had been served, not just for him, but for every neighbor who had suffered under Karen's reign. Her power had crumbled, and the community could finally begin to heal. As Karen was led away in handcuffs, she glanced at James. Her once defiant expression was now replaced with something that resembled regret. But James didn't flinch. The woman who had nearly destroyed his life would now face the consequences of her actions. And for the first time in months, James felt a sense of peace returning to his land and his heart. The courtroom victory was only the beginning of James's journey to rebuild. In the weeks following the trial, he poured his energy into restoring his farm. The compensation awarded by the court, a substantial $1 million, was both a blessing and a bittersweet reminder of everything he had lost. His barns, once a symbol of his family's hard work, now lay in charred ruins, but James was determined to rebuild them even stronger than before. Construction crews arrived on the property, carefully clearing the debris and laying the groundwork for the new structures. James worked alongside them whenever he could, his calloused hands familiar with the rhythm of building. The sight of the new barns taking shape brought a flicker of hope to the farm, a symbol of resilience in the face of destruction. Meanwhile, the fallout from the trial sent shockwaves through Woodridge Estates. Karen's conviction had left the HOA in turmoil. Residents who had once quietly endured her authoritarian leadership began to voice their frustrations. At the next HOA meeting, a vote was held to dissolve the current leadership entirely. A new board was elected, composed of reform-minded members like Tom, the neighbor who had testified against Karen. One of the new board's first acts was to issue a formal apology to James. The letter, signed by the entire HOA board, acknowledged the harm caused by their failure to rein in Karen's behavior. "We cannot undo the damage, but we hope to rebuild trust with you and the community," it read. James accepted the apology, though he knew trust would take time. The community, however, began to rally around James. Neighbors who had once been strangers stopped by to offer help. Some brought meals, others offered to help with the rebuilding, and a few even donated tools and equipment to replace what had been lost. For the first time in years, James felt a sense of belonging, even with the encroaching suburbs. As the new barns neared completion, James invited his neighbors for an open house on his property. The gathering was small but meaningful, a chance to thank those who had supported him and to show that his farm was not only standing, but thriving. Karen's sentence and the HOA's reformation became a cautionary tale for the county. News of the trial and its outcome spread, prompting other communities to scrutinize their own leadership and practices. James had not just defended his property, he had sparked a larger conversation about accountability and fairness in suburban governance. By the time the last nail was driven into place on the rebuilt barns, James stood back and surveyed his land. The wounds of the past months were still healing, but the sight of the sturdy new structures filled him with pride. The legacy of his family was intact and justice had prevailed. Looking out over his restored farm, James felt a deep sense of peace. The fire had nearly destroyed everything he held dear, but it had also reignited a strength within him and a belief that no matter how daunting the battle, standing up for what's right was always worth it. Months after the trial, the scars left by Karen's actions had begun to fade, though the lessons they brought remained. The farm stood tall once again, its newly rebuilt barns gleaming under the Texas sun. James Wilson, now surrounded by a more supportive community, felt a renewed sense of purpose. His land was more than just his home. It was a symbol of resilience, a testament to the value of standing firm against injustice. Woodridge Estates, once dominated by Karen's overreach, had transformed. Under the new HOA leadership, a culture of fairness and transparency emerged. Residents who had once feared retaliation now collaborated on projects to improve the neighborhood in ways that respected everyone's property and individuality. James found himself surprisingly connected to this new spirit of neighborliness. Neighbors often stopped by for advice or to share a meal. His annual harvest festival, once a small family tradition, had grown into a community event. Children played near the fields, laughter filling the air as the farm became a gathering place for all. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, James stood on his porch sipping coffee and watching a Max chase fireflies across the yard. The land was peaceful, the future bright. Justice had been served, and in its wake, both James and his neighbors had found something new: hope, unity, and the courage to protect what mattered most. The storm had passed, and a new dawn had arrived.